This is the Edelkrone Slider Plus and Motion Kit, and this is by far the most insane piece of camera gear we have ever used. Did we need that smoke for that intro? All right, it's like a Cypress Hill concert in here, but don't worry, the smoke will dissipate as this review goes on, so that shouldn't be a problem. Now, this is a pretty impressive setup here, and like I said in the intro, this is the most complicated motion controller I've ever personally worked with. And so I was pretty excited when Edelkrone reached out to us and said, hey, will you review our motion kit because it does a lot of new features? And I know you guys do a lot of video content at Fstoppers. So here is most of the setup. There's a few parts that I do not have attached to this kit, but I want to quickly just go over kind of what this can do, and then I'm going to talk about each one of the components individually. And then I want to take this outside and do a really dynamic time lapse at night, maybe with the stars, where I can kind of pan from one side and have the camera completely change orientation and get a time lapse that is unlike anything we've been able to produce so far here in the Fstoppers office. So let me show you what's in front of me right now. This is the Edelkrone Slider Plus. We also have their newest Slide Module V2 motor here, which allows this entire thing to be automated. You can use your cell phone, and with just the slide of a button, you can make this thing automated, which is really, really cool. If you've never used a slider that has a motor before, this is a game changer. Like, I really could never go back to doing this manually because it's just so hard to get this motion smooth, because inevitably there's always a point in the track where it has a little more tension and then it starts to move quickly, and then your hand, it's very hard for you to move this in a very slow motion. So I like having the motor. It's one of the nicest features I've ever had when it comes to adding motion to your video productions. Now, this Slider Plus is the long version, which measures 21 inches, which is actually relatively short, but they do make another slider that's even longer than this. It's the Pro version. But what makes this slider so interesting is that, as I'll show in a minute, if you slide it normally, you get the full 21 inches of motion, which might be enough motion for a lot of productions. I actually find that I use a lot less of a rail system than you would think. But if you actually mount your tripod to the bottom of this, you can essentially get twice the distance. You get 21 inches on this side, and then the way this is designed, you'll get 21 inches on the right side. So I'll show you how that works here in a minute. Now, what we have on top of our Slider Plus is a Head Plus, and what this does is it adds two more axes? How do you say this word? Okay, apparently it's axis. Axis. So if we have one axis here, which is sliding left to right, we can now add a tilt feature, which goes up and down, and we can add a pan axis, which is going to go left and right. So all in all, we have three ways to move the camera, which gives us a lot of flexibility when you want to create really dynamic motion with your camera. Now, with this setup, you can also get the focus module, which mounts right here, and you can actually control the depth of field and the focus of your camera. Our lenses on the Panasonic GH5 unfortunately focus by wire, and as far as I can tell, they are not compatible with this system. But if you have some larger lenses, say with your DSLRs, or if you have manual cine lenses that have hard start and stops, you can utilize this focus motor, which is going to give you a fourth axis. So not only can you slide, pan, and tilt, but you can also focus. And with their app, you can also lock focus and have these complex movements happening while you maintain focus through your entire video. I would love to try out that feature, but unfortunately, with this setup, I'm not going to be able to use this. So let me break all of this down and look at some of these parts individually before we head out onto location and try to create a really cool shot. So the base of this entire Edelkrone system is the Slider Plus, which I have here. And as you can see, this looks like kind of a typical slider. It has a carriage here, it slides left and right. Let me mount just a simple ball head here so I can show you how this works. And I'm just going to screw this camera on. Now, what a slider does is it lets you move your camera left to right and really exploit any parallax that you might have in your scene. So anything close to the camera is going to move really quickly, and anything far away from your camera is not going to really move much at all. Now, this little bit of motion is going to give a lot of dynamics to your video footage, and it's just going to make your overall production look that much higher. Now, of course, you can also turn your slider perpendicular to your camera, and you can kind of get those push-in shots and those pull-out shots. it really makes your camera look like it's on a dolly while still maintaining a really small piece of gear. In fact, this slider is so small at 21 inches, you can literally break this down, take off your camera, and you can really probably fit this in a backpack, which is really, really cool. But if I want to show you guys the most unique feature and coolest design element of this slider, I'm going to have to lift it up off of its feet and actually mount it to a tripod. Okay, so since we're doing this review on a tabletop, I don't really have a proper tripod that's going to lay low enough, so I've used this little Manfrotto tabletop tripod, and it's not the best use of a tripod because as I spin this, it's going to cause the whole thing to fall. But basically, I just want you guys to see that the way this is designed, you can actually go to the left and the whole unit pivots around this carriage that you lock down. And essentially what it's doing is it's almost doubling the length of your slider. Now, I remember seeing one of edelkrone's designs on the internet a long time ago, and I thought, whoa, this is a really, really clever idea. It allows you to have something that's both portable and lightweight, but giving you the flexibility to get these really long movements if you need something a little bit longer than the 21 inches that we have here. Now, as I said in the beginning of this video, having a slider is really, really handy, but it's a lot more useful if you can motorize it. What I have right here is the Edelkrone Slide Module version 2. And what it is, it's basically just a motor that's got some teeth here, and you just simply mount it onto the side of your slider. And in order for this to work, you do have to change out the belt on your slider. The Slider Plus does ship with a canvas belt, but if you want to use it with the motor, you do have to change it out and put this belt on that's made of rubber and it has these teeth on it. Now, one thing that you'll immediately notice from this review is that Edelkrone has gone through great lengths to make the system really modular. So you can add exactly what you need to your system so that, one, you're not having to buy things you don't need, but two, you're also able to customize this so that it fits your needs exactly. So with this slide module, I can run this both on AC power here in the studio, but if I go on location, I can plug in 2 batteries and run this just on battery power, which is really useful. Because I'm here in the studio, I'm going to plug this in with the power adapter, and as you'll hear, it will power on. And that little sound means that this is now up and running. It's actually on, and I can now sync this device to my phone using Bluetooth and do all of my controls directly from my phone. There's no power switches, there's no lights, there's no need for an external controller. I can do everything I need to right from the phone. So it's now discovering the device, and in a few seconds, it has automatically paired up with my device. And with the app, I can just simply push or pull the slider to the left or the right, and as you can see, the carriage is going to carry the camera. On the app, we have these different poses, and basically if I place the slider where I want it and then hold down the pose, it's going to remember this position, and then I can slide it all the way to the right, and I can hold down pose 2. And now if I tap either one of these poses, it's going to go to the previous position. And it will even tell you how long it's going to take. So in this case, it's going to take 10 seconds to go from right to left. I can touch it again to stop it. I could lower the speed and lower the ease in and out, which is going to determine if this goes quickly to the right or if it has a quick parabolic movement and then kind of slows back down as it reaches the edge. And if I tap both of the buttons at the same time, it's going to take the carriage to the right, and then it's going to loop it back and forth, which is really cool if you're doing something like an interview and you want this to just go back and forth and get that really dynamic movement without having to monitor it at all. Now, I don't know if you can hear this with my mics right now, but this is relatively quiet. If you had this about 5 to 10 feet away from your talent, I don't think you would hear this with any of your microphones, which is incredibly important if you're going to be using this on sets where you have sound. Now, over the years, we have owned a lot of different sliders. Some of them have been manual, some of them have been motorized. But what really sets this thing apart is going to be the Head Plus unit. So let's mount that on top of this and let's see what we can do when we add 3 more axes of movement to this setup. Now, this is a beastly piece of hardware. This is heavy, this is substantial, this thing has some power behind it. But what's cool about the Head Plus is that as bulky as this thing is, I can simply straighten this out, I can remove this arm, and that whole big thing will fit easily in a backpack. So if you want to place this side by side with your slider, you can do that and probably still have room for a camera. I definitely can't say that with all controllers that I've used with sliders. Some of them are built so big that they're just kind of a pain in the butt to move around with, but you can tell a lot of engineering and thought has gone into this to make this as user-friendly as possible, but to also be as compact as possible. Now on the side here, we have a couple Ethernet ports that allow you to plug your follow module in, as well as the laser that we had at the beginning. Those two pieces of hardware are going to allow you to pull focus on the lens that you have, but since the lenses we have don't really work with that, I'm not going to include that in this part of the review. We have our DC in so that we can power this. We can also plug in some batteries and then plug this directly in as well. And then you also have a camera controller and time-lapse controller to where if you want to do some really complicated time lapses where you're having the controller actually fire off your camera at specific intervals so that you don't get any motion blur in your time lapses, you can do all of that as well. This thing gets pretty complicated, but if you're the type of photographer or videographer who likes to have a lot of flexibility, you're going to definitely appreciate all of the features that are built into this. There's also two cold shoe mounts up here, so if you wanted to mount a light or if you wanted to mount a monitor, you could put that directly on here, but let's go ahead and mount this thing on our Slider Plus here. And the way this works is we just simply hover this over our bolt, rotate this knob on the bottom, and then we can also spin this around to make this a little quicker. Let's tighten this really tight so it doesn't move. I'm going to need to power this up, and since I don't have my batteries with me, I'm going to plug it into DC power. You're going to hear a little chime that lets you know that this is powered up. And what we now need to do is we need to balance and mount our arm to our camera so that the motor can work as efficiently as possible. So let me just move this off to the side. And as I've said before, Edelkrone has really put a lot of thought into the design of their entire system, and you can really see that here with the arm and balancing system. So what I want to do is I want to mount my camera here on this arm as close to the center as possible. Now I'm using a GH5, which is a pretty small mirrorless camera. If you had a DSLR, you're going to want to really make sure you calibrate this well because those cameras can be a lot heavier than this one. I also have a 50mm equivalent lens on here, so this is really small. But in order to calibrate this, they have this cool little magnet here that just pops out. And if you just place this into the side here, which is where we're going to mount this arm to our head, and tighten this, I can essentially just balance this on the edge. And I can tell that this is a little back heavy, so what I'm going to do is loosen this up, move my camera forward just a little bit, and then tighten this. And I'm going to just kind of wobble it around to make sure that it's nice and balanced. And so I can tell because it's not going left or right or forwards or backwards, this is balanced pretty well. That's going to guarantee that I get the most performance out of my head unit. And it's also going to help with the torque and the battery life so that it's not having to work harder than it needs to. I can unscrew this, pull out this little calibration tool because it's magnetic. It pops right there in the front. And then if I move this back over, we can now mount this right here on our head. We want to make sure everything's nice and straight, everything moves pretty smoothly. And now it's time to sync up both the head and the slide to my phone so that I can use all of the different parameters to move this camera. Since I'm already synced up to just the slide, I can come up here and hit Switch Setup. This is now going to re-examine the configuration that I have. I can hit OK. It's discovering devices and bundling them. And boom, the app is now going to ask me if I'm using the slider on the ground or on a table, as I am, or on the tripod. The tripod is going to give you more motion, whereas having it on the table like this is going to give it a little bit less of a movement, but we'll hit ground. Now it's asking me to make sure that everything is nice and straight. This looks pretty good. We're going to hit done. Now what's really neat about this setup is that your app on your phone just recognizes all the Bluetooth devices, it pairs them up, and it combines them into one app. So you're only seeing exactly what you're using. And now not only do I have the slide controller, but I have the pan and tilt. So look at this. I can pan, I can tilt up, I can tilt down, and I can still slide. So we'll slide this over to the left. I'm going to hold down my pose 1, And then now, just with my hands, I'm going to bring this over here. I'm going to completely change the orientation of the camera. Hold down pose 2. I'm going to turn this up to the fastest speed with the quickest ease in and out. And then I'm going to double tap both pose 1 and 2. And as you can see, I now have a really cool camera movement. And because I tapped both of them at the same time, it is going to get to the end and it's going to loop back and forth. That's incredible. That is so cool. So I've been playing with this setup for the last week or so. I've been taking this around the neighborhood and I've gotten some really cool shots down at the beach. And I think this is one of the most powerful tools I've ever used for video. I can imagine what I could do if I needed to take a product shot and I wanted to have some really dynamic movement around that, or if I wanted to do an interview and have something a little bit more dynamic than just going back and forth. I could actually now pivot the camera left and right. That's really cool. And here in a minute, I'm going to take this outside and try to do a time lapse, which I'm going to do at night to make it a little more challenging. And I think this is going to create something that looks a lot like the time lapses I've seen online, and I never really knew how they did it. You could easily do that with something like this. Now, as incredible as this system is, and the design in this is just really spectacular, you can really tell that they put a lot of time into designing this. There are a few little things that annoy me a little bit. First, there are no power buttons on these two motors. And so the only way to power these on and off is to actually unplug the batteries or the DC power. But what I've found is that in many cases, I will forget to do that. And then when I come back to use this slider, the batteries have drained down, or at least they've drained enough to where they're not connecting with my app. I haven't used it enough to know exactly how long this takes to drain the batteries. But in the short time that I've been playing with this, I have noticed that I have drained the batteries quite a bit because I forget to unplug it. So I wish there was a hard power on and off button, but if you got in the habit of just removing the power cord, that probably would act as the power on and off. The other thing that kind of annoys me, that took me a long time to figure out, it wasn't the most intuitive thing, has to do with the app. And that is, the speed slider and the ease and out slider do not work live in real time. So I thought if I had my motion going like it is here, I thought I could just slide speed down and it would start to slow up, and then I could speed it back up and it would go faster. But I actually have to stop the whole process, choose the speed, which a lot of times I'm not sure what the speed is. I don't know if I need 1% or 36%. But then I have to restart the motion to get it to move faster or slower. So I do wish I could just dynamically move the speed and ease and out sliders live and get it to do the motion that I want and then hit record on the camera instead of having to stop the motion, arbitrarily figure out the speed, and then restart the motion back. So all that being said, I know this is getting a little convoluted. I struggle with technology, and I felt like this app just wasn't as intuitive as I would have thought. And so I probably could have saved a lot of time and heartache if I had just gone to their website and watched all the videos before trying to figure this out on my own. So now that I've shown you how to set this up and what this thing can do, let's take this out in the field. It's about 5 o'clock. I have a couple hours before sunset. I have a buddy who has an incredible backyard, and I think this would be the perfect location to showcase his incredible pool as well as the incredible sky here in Palmas del Mar. So here we are at the beach. I tried to go to my buddy's house to do a really cool shot of his pool. There was just too much light pollution over there, so I thought if I want to get the stars, I need to go to some place that's really, really dark. And in front of me, there's actually these amazing cliffs, and there's some water, and the moon has not risen yet, so I think we're going to be able to get a good shot, even though we are at half moon at the moment. So I have the head plus and the slider all the way to the left. I'm just going to hold down my pose 1, and I'm going to go ahead and slide it all the way over to my right. I want to try to create as long of a movement as possible. So I'm going to go all the way over to the right here, make sure my feet don't hit the carriage. My goal for this shot is to start facing the city where there's the most light pollution, and then to have it slide and pan all the way over into the total dark sky and in on the stars. So now that I have my two poses set, I'm going to set my speed to 1%. That's going to be the slowest slide possible. And then I'm going to set the ease and out to the slowest possible setting as well, so that it starts off really slow, ramps up speed, and then slows down as it gets towards the end of the movement. Now this app does have a time-lapse mode where the head plus unit will trigger the camera, and you can do time lapses that literally last for hours. I'm just gonna try to do a time lapse that's about 35 minutes. And to do this, I'm gonna use the key pose, which is going to keep the slider moving constantly throughout the entire process. So I've double tapped my 2 poses. My camera is gonna go back to the beginning of the time lapse, and I'm gonna figure out the correct exposure for this scene. Now I'm using the Panasonic GH5s because this camera is specifically designed to use higher ISOs and get a clean image. I'm going to change from the video mode that I usually use. We're gonna go into manual, and then I'm going to set my aperture wide open to 2.8. And then from some tests that I've done, I think 5 seconds is the sweet spot to really get a nice star shot. And finally, I'm gonna set my camera to ISO 1600. So I've taken a test shot. I can see that the exposure looks really good. So now the final piece of the puzzle here is I'm actually gonna turn my camera over to time-lapse mode. And from the app, if I double tap both of these, it actually tells me that this move is gonna take 2,000 seconds, which is about 33 minutes. And now with everything set correctly, I'm gonna be able to start the movement on my phone, start my camera, and of course, we're gonna have to turn off all of these lights. I'm gonna sit out here in the dark for 33 minutes, and at the end of this, we will have a time-lapse built completely in the camera. So as you can see from this time lapse, this turned out pretty cool. I wasn't quite sure what would happen with the ocean, so I set up a second time lapse, waited another 35 minutes, and I was able to capture this one. So I've obviously only really scratched the surface on what this thing can do, but if you're looking for a badass slider rig that can do a lot of complex motions, definitely check this out. For more content like this, head over to fstoppers.com where we feature free articles every single day. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel below so that you can get notifications when we release new videos on our YouTube channel. And if you want to learn from some of the best photographers in the world, head over to fstoppers.com/store where you can check out our full-length tutorials.